The Jamison family did not disappear suddenly. It only looked that way afterward. In reality, their disappearance had been building for months. Quietly, slowly, in ways that were easy to ignore. Bobby Jamison, his wife Misty, and their 6-year-old daughter Madison. They lived in Eufaula, Oklahoma, a small lakeside town, the kind of place where nothing ever really happens. And when it does, everyone notices. But the Jamisons were already becoming invisible. They stopped visiting friends, stopped attending family gatherings, stopped letting people inside their home. Those who did see them noticed something was wrong. Bobby was changing. He had always been quiet, but now he was withdrawn, tense, constantly alert. He spoke about people watching him, following him, trying to harm his family. He installed surveillance cameras, even though there had been no break-ins, no threats, no reason anyone else could understand. Misty was changing too. She became deeply involved in spiritual beliefs, talking about curses, dark forces, evil entities attached to the land. She believed their house was haunted, that spirits were moving through the walls, watching them, waiting. Friends later said Misty talked about shadowy figures and invisible presences, things that could not be seen but could be felt. The couple reinforced each other's fears. Instead of grounding one another, they spiraled together. And Madison, their daughter, she was quiet, shy, often clinging to her parents. Some relatives later said she seemed scared, not of strangers, but of something she could not explain. Despite all this, nothing about the Jamison family suggested what would come next. They had money. They had a home. They had no criminal history. They weren't running from the law. They weren't involved in drugs. They weren't known to have enemies. Then, in early October of 2009, they made a decision. They told relatives they wanted to buy land, remote land, in the San Bois Mountains, an isolated area of southeastern Oklahoma, known for dense forests, rough terrain, and almost no cell service. They said they wanted to start over, away from people, away from whatever they believed was following them. On October 8, 2009, they withdrew $32,000 in cash. Not a small amount, not something most families do casually. They packed their pickup truck, clothes, personal belongings, and their dog. They left their home and never returned. When the Jamison family failed to come back, relatives assumed they were camping, exploring land, unreachable due to poor signal. At first, no one panicked, but days passed, then a week, then more. Calls went unanswered, messages unread. Concern turned into fear. A search was organized, and soon, investigators found something chilling: the Jamison family's pickup truck. It was discovered deep in the San Bois Mountains, on a remote dirt road, far from any main highway. The truck was locked. Keys were not inside. Inside the vehicle, investigators found the family's dog, alive, weak, but still clinging to life. There was no food, no water nearby. Their wallets were found, driver's licenses, credit cards, all left behind. Most disturbing of all, the $32,000, still inside the truck, untouched, neatly stacked. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing suggested a robbery. The Jamison family had walked away. But why would anyone abandon money, identification, and a vehicle in the middle of nowhere? Search teams flooded the area. Volunteers, dogs, helicopters. The terrain was brutal. Thick brush, steep slopes, hidden ravines. But no matter how hard they searched, they found nothing. No footprints, No clothing, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the family had stepped off the earth. Then, investigators uncovered something that changed how the case was viewed. Security footage, video recorded just days before the disappearance. It showed Bobby and Misty inside their own home, standing motionless, not speaking, not interacting. For long stretches of time, they simply stood there, facing away from each other, holding their daughter, as if frozen. The footage unsettled everyone who saw it. There was no visible argument, no physical violence, no obvious explanation, just silence, stillness, and tension. Experts later said the behavior suggested extreme psychological stress, possibly shared delusions, possibly paranoia feeding paranoia. As the investigation continued, theories multiplied. Some believed the family had gotten lost, disoriented, overcome by the terrain. Others believed Bobby's paranoia led them deeper into danger, walking farther away instead of staying near the truck. There were darker theories too, that someone else was involved, that the remote location made them vulnerable. But again, there was no evidence, no blood, no signs of violence, no witnesses. For years, the Jamison family remained missing until nearly 4 years later, in November of 2013, hunters made a discovery: human remains in a remote part of the San Juan Mountains, not far from where the truck had been found. The bones were scattered, weathered, exposed to the elements. Dental records confirmed the unthinkable. They belonged to Bobby, Misty, and Madison Jamison. The family had been found, but the mystery was far from solved, because how they died, where exactly they went, and why, remained unanswered. And the condition of the remains raised more questions than it answered. No clear cause of death, no obvious injuries, no definitive timeline, just bones, silence, and a story that refused to make sense. And that's where the real mystery begins. When the Jamison family's remains were discovered, investigators expected answers. Instead, they found confusion. The bones were scattered across a wooded area, exposed, weathered, partially buried by time and nature. Animals had likely disturbed the site, moving remains, separating what once had been together. This made reconstruction almost impossible. There were no clear signs of trauma, no gunshot wounds, no obvious fractures indicating violence, but also no clear signs of accident, no evidence of a fall, no cliff nearby, no obvious environmental hazard. The official cause of death could not be determined, and that uncertainty opened the door to everything. Investigators focused on the most basic question: why did the family leave the truck? The vehicle had shelter, supplies, money, and a chance of being found. Walking away made no sense, unless they believed staying was more dangerous than leaving. Some investigators theorized the family became disoriented. That paranoia drove them deeper into the woods. Bobby may have believed someone was nearby, watching, waiting. In that state, every sound becomes a threat. Every shadow becomes proof. Misty's spiritual beliefs may have reinforced this fear, turning anxiety into certainty. Certainty that they had to keep moving. But then comes the question: why were the remains found relatively close to the truck? Not miles away, not deep in the mountains, but close enough that search teams should have seen something. And that raises a disturbing possibility: that they were alive while search teams were nearby, or that their remains were overlooked. Searches had been conducted multiple times, with dogs, with helicopters, Yet nothing was found until years later. Some believe the remains were missed due to dense terrain, heavy vegetation, limited visibility. Others believe something darker, that the bodies were not there initially, that they were moved later, but there is no evidence of that either. Another theory centers on exposure, that the family succumbed to the elements. Cold nights, limited food, physical exhaustion. But October temperatures in Oklahoma, while cold at night, are rarely fatal so quickly. And again, there was no clear timeline. What happened first? Who died first? Where exactly? None of it could be determined. One of the most unsettling details. Madison, the child, her remains were found among her parents, suggesting they stayed together until the end. There was no sign she ran away, no indication she was abandoned, which contradicts some darker theories. This was not a crime scene, at least not a traditional one. There were no weapons, no bindings, no signs of restraint, just a family, lost, together. Then there is the money, $32,000, still in the truck. If this were a planned disappearance, they would have taken it. If it were a robbery, it would be gone, but it remained untouched, which strongly suggests whatever happened was not motivated by money. Some investigators believe Bobby may have suffered a mental break, possibly exacerbated by untreated psychological issues, paranoia, delusions, fear spiraling beyond control. In that state, even rational decisions disappear. But that explanation struggles to explain why Misty followed, why Madison followed, why no one stopped, unless they were all sharing the same fear, a shared reality, detached from the outside world. There is also the land itself, the San Juan Mountains, an area with a long history of disappearances, accidents, and people getting lost. Dense forests distort sound. Distance becomes deceptive. Direction loses meaning. You think you are walking towards safety, but you are circling over and over. Some search experts believe the family may have believed they were close to a road, or lights, or help, but never actually reached it. Then there is the surveillance footage again. Investigators revisited it, frame by frame. The stillness, the silence, the lack of interaction. It suggested something deeper than fear. It suggested emotional exhaustion, resignation, or dissociation, as if they were already leaving mentally before they ever left physically. The Jamison case remains unsolved. No arrests, no definitive explanation, no closure, just theories, fragments, and unanswered questions. What pushed them to withdraw that money? At that exact moment? Why that specific location? Why leave the dog alive, locked in the truck? And most haunting of all, what happened in those final hours? Were they afraid, or convinced they were doing the right thing? Were they running from danger, or towards something they believed would save them? The Jamison family vanished, then reappeared only as remains. And the truth, whatever it is, died with them. As the investigation stalled, public attention slowly faded, but questions did not. They multiplied. One of the most overlooked aspects of the Jamison case was what happened before they vanished. Not days, not weeks, but months. Friends later revealed that Bobby Jamison had been acting increasingly paranoid. Long before the trip, he believed people were following him, watching the house, trying to harm his family. He installed security cameras, multiple ones, not unusual by itself, until you watch the footage. Hours of video, showing nothing, no intruders, no threats, just Bobby and Misty, standing in the living room, not speaking, not interacting, almost frozen. Some experts later suggested this could be shared psychosis, a rare condition when one person's delusions are adopted by another. The closer the relationship, the stronger the reinforcement. Fear feeding fear. Misty, according to relatives, was deeply spiritual, focused on end-of-times beliefs. She reportedly believed evil forces were near, that something was coming. In isolation, without grounding influences, those ideas can escalate, especially when reinforced by someone you trust. The family had also experienced conflict with neighbors, including a reported altercation involving a firearm. Police records confirmed at least one incident. This likely intensified Bobby's paranoia. He believed the system could not protect them, that law enforcement was unreliable, which may explain why, when things went wrong, he did not call for help. Instead, he trusted only himself. Another detail that continues to trouble investigators: the family's final destination. They were not simply driving aimlessly. They were headed toward land. Remote land. Land they planned to buy. Some believe Bobby wanted to start over, off the grid, away from perceived threats. The cash withdrawal supports this theory. But again, why abandon the truck? If the plan was survival, the vehicle was their strongest asset. Then comes one of the most disturbing theories, that the family believed they were already under attack. Not physically, but spiritually, psychologically. In that mindset, a truck becomes a trap. A phone becomes a beacon. Stillness becomes vulnerability. Movement feels like safety. Walking feels like escape. Search experts have pointed out that people suffering from extreme paranoia often make choices that appear irrational, but feel logical in the moment. Another angle explored years later: carbon monoxide poisoning. The truck was found stuck, possibly running at some point. Prolonged exposure can cause confusion, hallucinations, poor judgment, but tests were inconclusive. And again, it fails to explain why they left together. Then there is Madison, a 6-year-old child. Children resist danger. They cry, they fight, yet there is no evidence. She resisted, which suggests she trusted them completely, followed them, until she couldn't anymore. Some believe the family may have reached a point where exhaustion overtook fear, bodies shutting down, minds clouded. They may have laid down together, believing they would rest and wake up later, but never did. Years after the discovery, the case was quietly closed, without resolution, no press conference, no final explanation, just a line in a report: cause of death undetermined. For the Jamison family, that line became their legacy, a family that vanished, not because of one clear event, but because of a slow unraveling. Fear, isolation, and belief. Belief can be powerful. It can save or destroy. And in this case, it may have done both. Somewhere in the San Juan Mountains, the land remains silent. No marker, no memorial, just trees, wind, and unanswered questions. The Jamison family walked into that wilderness, believing they were escaping danger, but danger was already with them. And whatever truly happened in those final moments will likely never be known, because the only people who knew the truth never came back to tell it. There is another side of this case, one that investigators rarely discuss openly, because it lives in the space between evidence and discomfort. After the remains were found, some details were quietly noted, then never explained. The bones were scattered, but not randomly. Animals can move remains. That is true. But experienced forensic experts noted that the distribution was unusual, as if the bodies had not all decomposed in one place, as if movement had occurred after death or before. This raised a possibility that the family did not all die at the same time, a deeply unsettling thought. If true, it suggests at least one of them may have survived longer, alone, in the wilderness. Another disturbing question: why were no personal items found near the remains? No shoes, no backpack, no cash, no weapon, not even scraps. If animals were responsible, some trace should remain. Yet the site was almost sterile. This led some to speculate that the remains were not originally there, that they may have been moved. But again, no evidence supports this, and no evidence disproves it either. Then there is the land itself. Saint Bois Mountains, known locally for illegal activity, drug cultivation, isolated camps. Law enforcement acknowledged that criminal operations had existed in the area. Could the Jamison family have crossed paths with the wrong people? Some believe they may have unknowingly entered a protected area and were confronted, but this theory collapses under scrutiny. There were no signs of violence, no shell casings, no blunt force trauma. And again, why leave the truck? Another theory gained traction online, that the family believed the land itself was calling them. Misty Jamison's journals, which were never released in full, reportedly contained spiritual writings, references to cleansing, to escape, to transformation. Those who claim to have read excerpts say the language became increasingly detached from reality, not fantasy, but certainty, as if something irreversible was necessary. This has led to speculation of a planned disappearance, not an accident, not an attack, but a decision, a final act. However, this theory breaks down at Madison. No parent, no matter how lost, voluntarily condemns their child, unless their perception of reality is already broken, which brings investigators back to the psychological angle, the possibility that the danger was never external, but internal. Shared delusions, fear loops, isolation, each reinforcing the other, until rational thought collapses. In such states, people often believe death is not death, but transition, escape, protection, that the threat ends once the body does. It is terrifying, but documented. Another rarely discussed element: the family dog, found alive near the truck. Dogs are protective. They stay. Why did it not follow? Some believe the dog may have been intentionally left behind, a boundary, a sign. Others argue the dog may have been unable to navigate the terrain. But again, no clear answer. Years later, a former investigator quietly admitted this was one of the most disturbing cases of his career, not because of what was found, but because of what wasn't. No chaos, no violence, no struggle, just absence, as if the family simply stepped out of the world, and the world closed behind them. Today, the Jamison case remains officially unsolved. No new leads, no renewed searches, only speculation, debate, and silence. Some believe the truth is mundane, a tragic combination of factors. Others believe the truth is too uncomfortable, too complex, so it was quietly set aside. But one fact remains: a family left their home, with plans, with money, with a child, and vanished into a forest, leaving behind a truck, a dog, and a question: what would make you walk away from everything and keep walking? even when no one is chasing you, even when help is not far away, even when the danger might only exist inside your own mind. There is one final layer to this story, one that does not live in police reports or evidence logs, but in patterns that appear only when you stop asking what happened and start asking why. In the months before their disappearance, friends noticed subtle changes. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just withdrawal, shorter conversations, avoidance. The Jamisons were not panicking. They were preparing, selling possessions, cutting ties, simplifying. These are not actions of people expecting danger. They are actions of people expecting resolution. Investigators initially dismissed this as coincidence, but behavioral analysts later noted that this sequence appears in other cases. Families who vanish, without violence, without ransom. In these rare events, the motivation is not escape. It is alignment, the belief that everything must be set in order before something irreversible. In such cases, the mind does not see death, it sees necessity. Another troubling detail: the money, $32,000. Cash, left untouched. For criminals, this is impossible to ignore. For someone in distress, it is irrelevant, which suggests the disappearance was not driven by greed or fear of others, but by an internal logic, a logic that did not value survival the way we understand it. Then there is Madison, 6 years old, dependent, trusting, children in dangerous situations. Cry, resist, run. There is no evidence of this, which implies she was not afraid, or worse, she believed everything was normal. Psychologists call this transmitted belief. When a child adopts the emotional reality of a caregiver, if the caregiver is calm, the child is calm, even when the situation is lethal. This is one of the most disturbing conclusions, not because it assigns blame, but because it removes malice. It suggests that no one intended harm, and harm happened anyway. Another rarely mentioned fact: search teams walked past the remains multiple times. The terrain, dense, uneven, deceptive. A body can vanish there, 10 feet away. This means the family may have been visible and invisible at the same time, alive, then gone. One misstep, one collapse, one moment of confusion. In environments like that, death does not announce itself. It waits. So which explanation is correct? Psychological collapse, environmental exposure, misjudgment, or something darker? The answer may be all of them. The Jamison case resists simplicity. It punishes certainty. Every theory explains something and fails somewhere else, which is why, after years, investigators quietly stopped pushing, not because they did not care, but because there was nowhere left to go. No suspects, no motive, no timeline that holds, only aftermath. The case now exists in fragments: a truck in the woods, a dog waiting, a backpack of cash, bones on a hillside, and a silence that refuses to speak. What remains is not a mystery to solve, but a warning. That disappearance does not always require force. Sometimes it only requires belief, isolation, and the moment when reality quietly lets go. The Jamison family did not vanish in a flash. They faded, step by step, into a place where answers cannot follow. And that may be the most frightening conclusion of all. In the end, There was no dramatic revelation, no hidden villain, no final confession, no moment where everything made sense. The Jamison family did not leave behind answers. They left behind absence. And absence has a weight of its own. Years after the remains were found, investigators quietly acknowledged something. This case was never going to be solved, not in the way people expect, because the truth, if it exists, does not sit in one place. It is scattered, across decisions, across emotions, across moments that seemed harmless, until they weren't. One of the last officers assigned to the case later said something telling. If we had arrived 1 hour earlier, or 1 hour later, we might have seen everything differently. That sentence matters, because it implies the line between safety and disappearance was razor thin. Not days, not weeks, minutes. There was no single fatal choice. There was a chain, a drive, a stop, a belief, a step into unfamiliar terrain, each one reasonable, each one survivable, until combined. When people imagine disappearance, they imagine force, struggle, fear. But most disappearances do not look like that. They look quiet. They look ordinary. They look like a family walking into the woods, believing they will walk back out. The Jamison case endures because it refuses drama. It offers something worse: plausibility. Every explanation feels possible, and therefore, none feels satisfying. Mental health, exposure, disorientation, environmental hazard, all valid, all incomplete. What happened to the Jamison family may never be narrowed down, but what matters is what the case reveals: that safety is not guaranteed by intention, that love does not prevent tragedy, that preparation does not equal protection, and that sometimes people disappear, not because they are taken, but because the world does not notice when they fall out of it. Madison Jamison, 6 years old, did not choose anything. She followed, as children do, into a place she trusted. That detail alone is enough to haunt this case forever. Today, the land where they were found looks unchanged. Trees, wind, silence. No marker, no sign, no warning. Just another stretch of wilderness. And somewhere within it, a story that ended without telling its ending. The Jamison family did not leave behind a mystery. They left behind a question: how fragile is normal? How quickly can certainty disappear? And how close are we all to stepping into silence? The case remains officially unresolved, but unofficially, it has become something else. A reminder that not all disappearances are loud. Some happen while everything seems perfectly quiet. And once they do, there is no rewind, no second call, no way back, only the unanswered space where a family once existed, and the uncomfortable truth that sometimes that is all there is.